I think that there's a lot to be scared about in that sense, but I think the biggest thing where we are now is we have to start standing up. We have to start, putting our money where our mouth is. So something we talk about a lot is like how this Bud Light thing, and we're going to talk about this brand Authentics, right? There's these brands that are picking up on this and saying, okay, we're going to start restructuring society to match our values. So now you have to start putting money into the brands that you want and the brands that will support you. And I think that's kind of how you start to slowly take things over again. And you start to say, okay, no, enough is enough. We want people to value being parents. We want people to value the unique role a woman has.
As you all know, I grew up with two older brothers. We played soccer, basketball, kickball, baseball, and Elliot's made-up football game called Tackle at the 2-Yard Line. We'll share more about that in another episode. I loved playing sports with my big brothers, but I didn't love always losing, which I always did. And until about 5 minutes ago, the reason for my losing streak was quite obvious. I'm a girl playing against boys. But in this strange new world of ours, this reality isn't so obvious for many people, including the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association. Paula Scanlan experienced this firsthand as a member of the UPenn swim team. All of a sudden, this phenomenal teammate showed up, a person called Leah Thomas. Thomas blew everyone out of the water, no pun intended. Only thing is, Thomas was swimming on the women's team, and Thomas had a penis. What? Paula joins us today to share her journey from collegiate athlete to independent women's forum activist. My interview with Paula Scanlan right after this. We are thrilled to announce our partnership with Authentics Athletic Apparel, spelled with 2 X's at the end because it's our XX chromosomes that make us female. And contrary to current belief, no amount of hormones, no number of surgeries can change that. And no female athlete should have to compete against men. But at the moment, this is exactly what's happening in both amateur and professional sports. It's not fair, nor is it safe. Wearing Authentics lets us take a stand to support and protect female athletes. And I don't think it's hyperbolic to say it. We're protecting the future of womanhood. Authentics gives 10% of all sales to the Independent Women's Forum, the nonprofit which fights for women's causes, including our right to our own spaces and our right to compete against other women and only other women. Check out Authentics.com and use promo code LOVELIFE for 10% off your purchase. That's Authentics.com, AUTHENTIXX.com, and use promo code LOVELIFE, all one word, for 10% off your purchase. Paula, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me today.
We really appreciate your time and, more importantly, appreciate what you're doing in this just very strange world that we're living in right now. And to introduce you to the audience and to help them understand what you've been through and how it's brought you to your mission and your work today as an ambassador for the Independent Women's Forum. Can you please catch us up to speed? I think most people should have a sense of what's been going on with the NCAA and men in women's sports. But if they aren't aware, this would be a great opportunity for them to become acquainted with the concerns that we have as women and honestly just as society in general for what you've been through.
Yes. So back in the day, we're going to start from the very beginning.
Let's start at the beginning.
In 2010, the NCAA decided to put out this policy that said if you are a man and compete on a men's team or whatever, you can say in 1 year time, you can just go on testosterone suppressant and then you are good to go to compete on a women's team. And what's really interesting about this the rule that they put out is that there was not a lot of scientific research in it. And it was just filled with stories of people saying, well, I'm comfortable and I'm happy and therefore I should be able to compete on whichever team I choose to. And so a lot of people had no idea that that was a rule that had existed since, I think, 2010. So almost 15 years at this point. And myself was one of those people that had no idea what this policy was. And what ended up happening is I go to college at the University of Pennsylvania. My freshman year, we don't have anyone competing in the wrong category. The beginning of my sophomore year, we have a team meeting. And in this team meeting, a member of the men's team is leading a women's team meeting. And our coach just looks at him and says, "This is your meeting." And he tells us that he is transgender and will be joining our team in the following season. 1 year later. He's still competing on the men's team. He's still in the men's locker room. He's still on the men's roster. He's still competing at meets. He says, "Next year I will be doing the same exact thing, but on your team." And you can probably guess, but his name was William Thomas, and he eventually became Leah, who became the first ever women's champion, air quotes on women, women's champion at the University of Pennsylvania, my school, as well as the first transgender to win a women's title, as well as the first male individual to win an NCAA championship in the D1 area. So all of that sort of happened because this policy was there. And so when this announcement was made to me, I said, I was waiting for the cameras to come out. I thought this was a
Right.
pink show or something. And then I looked at these rules and I saw that, no, actually, he is following the rules. And they just said, yep, 1 year and you're good to go. So obviously it unfolded the worst way it could, again, with him winning. Not every single male that transitions to the women's category ends up winning an event. And so I think in some ways it showed how completely insane and ridiculous it was by having, again, the worst case scenario is that national championship being won. And additionally, in the entire situation, my teammates and I were told that if we objected to him being on our team, we should seek psychological services.
Right, because you were the ones with the psychological problems.
Yes, that's what they told us. And they continually told us if we ever spoke out about it, we would regret it. We would spend the rest of our lives tainted by speaking against a marginalized group of people. They didn't quite say this, but they sort of implied that it's the new civil rights thing and it would be equivalent to being against, being for segregation. So a lot of different emotional manipulation tactics. And many of my teammates, after they started talking to us more and more and telling us that our opinions were wrong, people were afraid to even talk with each other about it. I had teammates that used to have conversations about how upset they were, and then they just said, "I can't talk to you." And I even had friends that swam for other Ivy League teams that had to compete against us. And I had a friend who was a teammate back in high school, and I asked her, "What do you think about this?" At a different Ivy League school, and she just told me, "Don't talk to me. I'm not allowed to speak about this." So it just everywhere. It was not just my school. It was all of the girls who were competing at the NCAA championship as well. Obviously, Riley Gaines has spoken in great lengths about what she experienced and how even at the University of Kentucky, they put them through media training. And so, yes, in a very abridged version of what happened, it was bad rules in place at the NCAA level allowing this to happen. And then universities and coaches and administrators being a part of this problem and not giving anyone a voice to voice their concerns. The only elevated voice was that of this one male who believed that he was a woman. And the university continued to highlight his accomplishments on social media. Our school actually nominated him for NCAA Women of the Year when there are so many other female athletes at the University of Pennsylvania that are incredibly accomplished. So that really shows us where the University of Pennsylvania stood on this issue and that they were willing to throw away the feelings and accomplishments of all the other women at the school and prioritize that of a man. So yes, in very short, obviously we're going to get more detail about it, but that is the summary, I would say, in a few minutes of sort of what went down.
I have so many follow-up questions and responses. And I just think about, so here's something right off the bat that I think about. When this issue started to come up and just be more public, you're dealing with it as a college athlete, as a swimmer, which the dedication and determination it takes to be a swimmer. I know you couldn't do most things that most young girls are doing. You couldn't go to parties because you had to get up at 4 a.m., maybe earlier, to swim those laps. I mean, being a swimmer takes an incredible amount of commitment and dedication. And then to have someone who is biologically, physically stronger by virtue of an XY chromosome structure that we have XX, to just come and obliterate all that because he decides he feels like he's a woman. By the way, you guys were bullied. Where were the feminists is the question that always comes to mind. Where are the feminists? You guys talk about the patriarchy. One dude is able to override every woman on your entire sports program, from swimming to every other program, to where you guys are alienated. You can't even talk to each other about it. Gaslighting extraordinaire. It's to me appalling. And I still to this day ask this question, where are the feminists?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I will say there are a few feminist groups that are big on this issue. I don't want to make a blanket statement. I know like people always kind of make over generalizations. I want to give credit where credit is due. There are some left-leaning myself, very straightforward. I'm right-leaning, I'm conservative. I have been for pretty much my entire voting age life. But there are people on the left and people who traditionally voted Democratic that are for us on this issue. So Martina Navratilova, huge name.
She's spoken out.
Could not be more supportive. In fact, she actually called me on the phone during my season. Yeah, because we had a mutual friend and she knew what I was going through. And she called me on the phone to tell me, keep speaking up, they're stupid, and this is a ridiculous policy. And that meant a lot to me. I was, crying in my room, isolated, 21 years old. And again, Martina and I do not agree on anything else. Every single thing, political stance that she has, pretty much I'm on the other side of, except for this issue.
Right.
There's other groups like Women's Liberation Front. They're very, radical feminists, also huge on this issue as well. So what I am seeing about this issue is that it is in a way unifying. Of course, there's people who disagree, and I get a lot of hate comments, and I know all about that.
I bet.
I think that there is a group of feminists that do support this, while there are a lot that don't, which is confusing. But I do want to give credit to those that have spoken about this issue and do acknowledge that this is idiotic and the best way to explain it. And this is crazy. And also that they still are Democrats, registered Democrats that probably will still vote for Democrats, but they know that this is too far.
Well, and I've had Kara Dansky. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but I've had her on the program. Yes. And her work. And I asked her the same thing. I said, where are the feminists? And again, she and I probably agree on very little on the broader realms of concerns and issues. But I was so thankful for her because as a feminist, she has, I'm hoping, a window to invite people to consider things that maybe, again, like you said, folks over there are just lockstep. Maybe they'll listen to her, whereas they might not listen to me because they're like, well, she's conservative, she's Christian. And so I'm hoping that all of us, like you said, can find that common ground. And also I'm a huge tennis fan. So the fact that you spoke to Martina is like, whoa.
Yeah, my mom's a huge fan. My mom got to meet her with me at an event. My mom played tennis in high school, still does to this day. And she was like fangirling. It was crazy.
Yes, I would too.
But yeah, interesting you bring up Kara Dansky, right? So I've met her in person multiple times. I had a really great conversation with her one time in person. And she said to me, like, there's a lot of people on her side that are like, why do you support, Christian conservatives like Riley, like Paula, like, some of us that have been speaking out on this. And she said that she told them, I don't care about their other beliefs. That's not what this is about. This is saying that we're unified on this one issue. And whatever we can do to all come together and beat this, I'm going to support them. And I really appreciated her saying that to me because in this environment, in this day and age, and I've sort of, as I've grown up, I've seen so many more people lose family members. I know people who say they don't speak to their family based on political beliefs. They have neighbors that won't speak to them based on their political beliefs or who they voted for. And in a day and age where I hate that that's the case, but where it is common, where it's more normal than not normal, I do really appreciate her having that type of conversation with me and being honest and saying, I know we have things we disagree on, but we're not here to get into that. We're not here to fight each other on these other issues. We're here to fight this one evil thing that's happening and come together and have everyone do it. So I think that it's definitely, I know there's a lot of feminists still that are, on the wrong side of this. I know, especially with the Me Too movement, that's something I've criticized a lot, that there are people who have spoken vocally about the Me Too movement. How is the Me Too movement not getting involved with this when there are grown men flashing children, young girls? How is that not sexual harassment at the very least? And why are they silent? And that, I think, is a bigger group to criticize, right? Those same people who are speaking out saying, believe all women, and all that stuff. And they're just, oh, well, we don't believe women if they say they're uncomfortable undressing with somebody with male parts.
Riley said something on Joe Rogan that really struck me, that she kept being, I think, when I think about your story, I think of how much shock you must have been in. Just like you said, the initial, Thomas is saying, I'm going to be on your team next year with my male parts and my male physicality, but I'll go on some hormones for half a minute and then that will level the playing field. I'm sure, you're like, where are the cameras coming out? This is an April Fool's joke. We're getting punked. It's still, to me, I still wake up going, I'm having a conversation with a young woman today that is a female athlete, and she had to compete with men on her team and against men. My point is, I still am in shock that we're here. And as a Gen Xer, I feel we failed you somehow. Somehow we let rampant, illogical, unscientific, bizarro world ideology infiltrate our institutions to where your entire university, Ivy League, by the way, supposedly one of the best institutions in the country, is allowing pure nonsense to run amok, such that girls are being oppressed. They have to go into a locker room with penises. This is, and Riley said something like she kept waiting for someone's dad to beat down the door and just yank Thomas out of there and be done with it. Where were the grown-ups in the room? And that's my generation, and we didn't protect you. And that troubles me, and it makes me very sad. And I apologize on behalf of my generation. Really. We were the grown-ups in the room, and we didn't protect you.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing in this entire situation that I talk about a lot is I kept waiting for somebody to step in and do the right thing. And I think that's the case not just in this instance, but if you look at other things in history that have happened that are bad or whatever. So many people just say, well, I was waiting for somebody else to do it, because surely somebody else was going to stand up and say the right thing. Right. And so at certain points when they announced the Ivy League was revisiting the policy or something, which they just say to make everyone happy, and they come back and they say, well, we actually can't change anything. Sorry. And there was each layer, there was a different person who was sort of in that position, right? The Ivy League, Penn saying something, or the NCAA saying maybe, or the USA Swimming saying maybe. And every single time we would get hope, we would feel, oh, yes, finally this is going to be put to a stop. And then they would come back and say, well, we're going to revisit this actually after the season is over, because we can't make any mid-season changes. And I felt like I kept on getting my hopes up for these things to change, or for these things to happen. Or there was even some parents on my team who wrote letters to the NCAA and said, this can't be on us to say things. And the parents, their daughters would speak and say, I can't believe Paula disagrees with you. She's a horrible person. Yeah. So it was this situation where people would just say that they were in support of having a man compete on a women's swim team just to get social standing and to get clout and to feel, morally superior to anyone else. Meanwhile, their parents are sort of pushing out a different narrative. So that was also a very confusing situation where people were not even really saying what they really thought, because they didn't want to be in a position to feel like they might lose friends or that they might lose something. And that's wrong. I think that those types of people, and honestly, I've said this before, I have less respect for my teammates who acted that way than the people who wholeheartedly believed that anyone who identifies as a woman is a woman. Because at least that they have conviction standing on what they believe. I don't agree with it. I think it's wrong. I know it's wrong. But I have honestly more credit to them for having an opinion and standing by it than the people who thought it was wrong and then pretended that they didn't think it was wrong.
Right. It really separates those who have the courage and then those who don't. And to me, it's just so confusing. It's so confusing. I'm courageous about basic biology.
I know. People call me courageous all the time. And I'm like, seriously, this is not courage. The people who fought in wars, that's courage. The people who served this country, that's courage. The people who have fled, I have an aunt who lived in Cambodia. And she dealt with the Pol Pot and the whole regime there. That's courage. Coming to America in a country you speak no language and losing your family members. That is courage. This should not be courage. But somehow,
but yet it is.
come to that because everybody is so cowardice in this and so silent. And it honestly, it makes me feel bad when people say that about me, because again, this should not be something that I have to stand up and say and feel scared to do. But yet, None of my other teammates have talked about this. Most of the other girls at the Ivy League have not talked about this.
Right.
And that shows like how much fear there is about just saying something that's so true and simple. We should not have men in women's sports in women's bathrooms.
Well, so the question, and I get into this with a lot of my friends won't talk to me about these issues because if they're on the other side, they don't want to get in a fight. And I get that. But I have one friend she'll engage with me. And she brought up the point, well, like Serena Williams, she's bigger and stronger and faster than the other women. And as if that means that if a dude just wants to play with women and against women, then he's going to happen to be bigger and stronger and faster. And that's just fine because there are physical differences and variations among the sexes. So if we mix it up, what's the difference? And the final question there to that argument is, why did we ever have women's sports in the first place? If there isn't a huge distinction that makes it completely unfair for men and women to compete in a physical venue and an arena based on physical traits and abilities, why did we ever have women's sports in the first place? Why was Title IX necessary? If you can answer me that question without getting to the point that it's totally unfair, then I guess you win the argument, but they can't and they won't. I mean, it's just absurd.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's something that people like, I see a lot of, so with this, a lot of sports, or not even sports, like chess, for example, has come into the equation, right? Like women's only chess. And then the people on the other side, the radical leftists that agree with this, they're saying, well, what physical advantage do like men or males have over females in chess? It's not about that. It's saying if we're going to have a women's category, it needs to be for women, or what was the point? And
Right.
Again, the reason is if you look at it, if you look at the stats, if you look at the Olympics, if you look at any sport, every single champion will be male. And what's interesting is when I first started talking about this, something that I said was that when I have children one day, I don't want to have daughters because they won't have the opportunities to play sports like I did. Yeah. And people really hated that answer because they claimed that I'm a misogynist and that all this stuff and that I don't like women. The reason I said that is because if we continue in this trajectory, we're just going to have two categories for people that are male. And this is not to say that there aren't some women that are better. I can swim faster than my brother who never swam ever in his life, because of course I can, because I have training. The reason we have these categories is if you take two people, a male and a female, and you put them through equivalent training, the male will always beat the female. It's not controversial to say that. It's not bigoted to say that. And it's because of these different factors, and it's because male and female were made to be different. And again, it's not just testosterone. Testosterone is one hormone in the human body. We have men on average have larger lungs and bigger hearts, and the density of their bones is different, and even the shape of their body. I think this is something in swimming that matters a lot, is that males have narrower hips than females. And again, the female hips are wider to carry babies. Whether you choose to or not, that's your decision. But in a sport like swimming, the narrower hips actually, if you just push off the wall, you're going to go further because you're more hydrodynamic, because you're more contained and there's less drag in the water. And that's a factor that no matter what you do, what drugs you take, what part of your body you cut off or not, that will always remain. And I think that there's just no understanding or appreciation of that on the other side. They're just saying, nope, they're equivalent. There's nothing else that's different.
Right. I mean, I believe other than your red blood cells, every cell in your body has your chromosomes, and it's either XX or XY. And to your point, doesn't matter what you cut off or how many hormones you take, it's not going to change. You're not fundamentally changing your the nucleus in your cellular structure is not changing. And as a psychologist, I find this so troubling that we've now ushered in an era where you are considered to be this far-right nut job who's radical and wants to hate on people who have what used to be gender dysphoria. Probably the next DSM won't even call it a disorder. But I'm a psychologist. That's a psychiatric illness. If you think you're the opposite sex, I have a lot of compassion for you because something is deeply, deeply wrong with your psyche. I don't know what happened to you in childhood. It's really bad. Something really went amiss. But for me as a psychologist to affirm this delusion, this is the delusion. That'd be like me taking a schizophrenic client who's like, hey, Karen, I can fly. And I'm like, cool, let's go to the top of the Sears Tower and I'll push you off and I'll see you fly. I'm affirming your belief that you can fly. This is where we are. It's that twisted and that evil, I could even say, for people to affirm people's psychiatric illnesses and their delusions. But that's where we are. And you are the right-wing nut job who actually wants to speak out against it. And you're such a hater too. Where are we?
It's going so far. I mean, not to sidebar from this conversation, but have you started seeing in other countries they're allowing people to be euthanized because they're so depressed?
Yeah. Yes. It's not a sidebar. You're right.
Where have we gone? Why would that ever be a doctor's path to healing somebody ever? And I think that is also shows where we've gone. I hate saying this, but truly there's some people who just need a little bit of honesty and a little bit more tough love. I think that there's a little bit, like, there's too much coddling and just no one wants to hear something they don't want to hear. And again, like, I grew up, my parents would tell me no all the time. My parents would say, you can't do that. This is bad. I can't believe you did this. And there needs to be more firm, like, right and wrong and teaching of, yes, like, I'm sorry that you feel like you want to be a woman and you feel like you'd be happier competing on the women's team. But the answer is no. And we're here to make you happier. We're here to make you maybe make some accommodations and say, well, you can be on the men's team. If you want to wear a women's suit, compete in a women's suit. If you want to grow your hair out, grow your hair out. If you want to shop in the women's department, shop in the women's department. We can say yes to all those things, but we don't have to say yes to everything. And I think that that's sort of what's happening, especially in the medical industry, where doctors and therapists and all those people are told that they can't say no to anyone. And I'm hearing that again from, like, yourself and other people in the psychology industry and all of that, like Jordan Peterson, all those different and a lot of other doctors who have come out and said, I can't do this anymore. They've kind of blown the whistle on what they're forced to do with their clients on gender transition and gender affirming care, as they call it. And it's shocking. And again, there's really no firm stance in saying, enough is enough. This is not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, and then there's a lot of twisted research that has come out, and the parents hear things like, well, would you rather have a son than a dead daughter because she's going to kill herself if you don't let her transition? And then the research is coming out, the legit research showing that people are suicidal. We're going to have an enormous number of suicides, I predict, when these kids that have been butchered and been on puberty blockers since they were 7, 8, 10 years old, when they arrive at age 25 and they're like, oh, wow, went through this adolescent angst and turns out I actually wish I were back to my original sex. Oops, too bad. Parts are gone. Hormones have disrupted my ability to ever have a true sexual connection, intimacy. I may never achieve orgasm. This is going to be fundamentally, it's going to wreak havoc on an entire generation of kids who were lied to by their doctors, by their psychiatrists, by pharma, which they love if you transition because then you're a customer for life. Let's not take big pharma out of the equation.
Yes, I talk about them in my speeches too. They're
perfect.
We had to look at them.
I'm so glad you're addressing that because that's something Kara Dansky really raised my awareness on that. And I'm no fan of pharma. So, I mean, as a psychologist, I'm completely anti-pharma in every way, shape, or form. But it's playing a role here in this conversation, in this reality as well.
It is. I mean, that's what I say. I said this to somebody who was questioning me that was on the opposing side. And I said, look, you can think that gender affirming care, I hate calling it that, by the way. I think we need to rebrand it. So forgive me for saying that. I think we have to be honest with experimental procedures and surgery or
words are powerful. Absolutely.
Hormones, right? So I just said, you can think that whatever you want to call it is the right thing for somebody. And I can think that it's the wrong thing. But what we should look at and agree upon together is that the pharmaceutical industry, doctors, have hundreds and thousands of dollars to profit off of this. Whether you think that that's the correct thing or not, you have to look at where the money is. And they're profiting, again, hundreds and thousands of dollars per patient. You become a patient for life. You're on these hormones, on these drugs, multiple drugs, the rest of your life. And the surgeries that oftentimes go wrong, and then they have to have follow-ups. And again, I raised this to everyone. I said, have we learned nothing from the opioid crisis, for example? I live actually right near the Purdue Pharma headquarters. In Connecticut. Yeah. I know all about that. I know how horrible they were. I know everyone in this area has a really, really bad perspective of them. If they come to events, people don't want to talk to them. I know all about that. And it's evil. And why are we trusting pharma and these people who have a track record for abusing patients, for forcing doctors to overprescribe? Why do we trust them? And again, maybe it is the right thing. I know that it's not, but maybe it is. Let me just play devil's advocate for a minute.
Sure.
We should agree, at the very least, that there is profit to be made here, and you should scrutinize it further. And again, if we come to the conclusion that, oh, well, even though it's profitable, it's still beneficial. There's some procedures and medical things that are profitable, that are helpful, right? I'm sure chemotherapy, for example, right? It's pretty profitable for doctors to give. There's a lot of drugs that are involved there, but it cures cancer and it helps people extend their life. There's always going to be possibilities of it to be successful, but we have to scrutinize the money part first, because again, we can't trust that people won't profit if there's profit to be made.
As you know, we've been partnering with the Wellness Company for several months now. And personally, as someone who sadly no longer trusts the vast majority of medical professionals, I am so happy to be able to share the Wellness Company's array of products with the Love and Life community. Dan and I just purchased the Wellness Company's medical emergency kit, which includes vital medications with proven safety profiles like ivermectin, amoxicillin, and Z-Pak. The kit also includes a comprehensive guidebook researched and written by the company's chief medical board, including esteemed doctors who stood up to COVID tyranny, by the way, which is exactly why they've earned our trust. Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Harvey Risch, Dr. Drew Pinsky, and Dr. Paul Alexander, just to name a few. Head over to twc.health/lovelife and enter promo code LOVELIFE, all one word, for 15% off your order. That's twc.health/lovelife and promo code LOVELIFE for 15% off your order. We can take charge of our health, and the Wellness Company is here to help us do it. What do you think, as you're talking, what's coming to mind is that it's multifaceted, and to your point, at least let's look at the money trail. Let's at least have that conversation. What do you think is causing so many people, I mean, your peers at an Ivy League institution, really brilliant people, I mean, way smarter than me, way smarter than like the average human. These folks are the ones who, not always, but are many of the ones who are least likely to even entertain some of these possibilities that you're speaking to right here. What do you think is going on from your experience? Why people are just shutting down? End of story. You're just bigoted and you're against trans people. I have nothing to say to you because you're a hateful human.
Yeah, it's this whole overall movement of sort of grouping people into like marginalized and not marginalized, or oppressed and not oppressed, or like, I mean, oppressed and oppressor. And I think like that's something I saw through, even before this was really a big thing, like at these Ivy League institutions, like through my classes, even again, before I even thought the possibility of having a man compete on my women's swim team. It's always about people who are oppressed, and then they try to group you into like a group. So, for example, I'm half Asian. My mom, born in Taiwan. I have Taiwanese citizenship. And so people would constantly be like, oh, you know, like, what can I do to help you as an Asian who's being marginalized? And people would assume things about me or my experiences because I'm a certain way. And then they sort of get into this group where they're grouping all of them together and saying, oh, well, all of us who are not white and straight and whatever have to be united. And so they drag you in and they make you think, well, because you're an Asian, you also have to support this group, that group, and this group. And because of that, they've sort of made every single person believe that they have to be part of this group and support every single person in that group. And one of the groups that came into that is this whole transgender movement. And I've seen it a lot, again, how the grouping of the LGBTQ, whatever you want to call it, group, that there's a lot of gay people now who are saying, wait a minute, I'm gay, I've been gay my entire life, and I don't appreciate some of the things that are happening. And then other people are saying, well, they're part of our community, so there's no room for you to say no. And so that's really what they've started to do. And again, they've expanded it. It's really like everyone who's a person of color, everyone who identifies as gay or trans or whatever you want to call it. And we've just said, like, we're part of this sort of like person of color, trans LGBT. I don't know. It just keeps growing, but it's just like pretty much everyone but just straight white people. Like, I don't know. And it's so confusing. And again, like people would say things about me and I'd be like, well, I don't feel that way. I don't think about the fact that my race is what my race is. I just go about my life. I think that there's obviously different distinctions in society, but I think we've come to this age where we're in the 2020s where I think the bigger telling of success and all these different factors, or oppression, if you want to use that word, is how much money you grew up with, or, you know, if you had two parents, like things that don't have anything to do with who you want to sleep with, or who you were born, who your parents are race wise. And I think that there's just a lot of disconnect from that. And again, like, honestly, give them credit because their branding has been great to be able to pull this off. I mean, I think about that pretty frequently, obviously seeing a lot of marketing things in sort of the space I work in now. I think that that's honestly highly impressive how far that they've been able to pull this and how many different people they've gotten to brainwash to be supportive of something that's completely crazy.
Yeah. No, you're right. Got to hand it to them. To take
Right?
basic biology that any kindergartner or 3-year-old can tell you who is a girl and who is a boy, and to have highly intelligent people believe that that is absolutely possible to just change your sex. It's pretty impressive. Yeah, we got to get our act together, get our branding together.
I know. I always say that.
So you spoke before Congress. I watched the video. It was remarkable. I just think you're obviously so eloquent and so bright and so passionate, but you're still a relatively young woman, and you got up there and you spoke your mind, and you spoke truth to power, and hoping that they would utilize their power to represent their constituents, which the vast majority of us, I think, still are not brainwashed. We still know what's right and wrong and what's fair to women. And you brought up something that we've touched on a bit, but the fact that we are not protecting women in these locker rooms, we're not protecting women in these jails and prisons. Women are being raped because a dude says, I'm a woman, and then goes and gets incarcerated with the women. This sort of thing has happened. You talked about your own personal experience of having been a victim. And again, you spoke to the Me Too. What troubles me again, and I'm bringing back the generational piece, is I feel one of the reasons I wanted to speak out, I don't have a daughter, but I have nieces. It doesn't matter. I was once a young woman too. And where were the adults in the room? You had to speak to the adults in the room, and so courageously, again, shouldn't be courageous, but it was. And talk a little bit about that. Not many people go and speak before Congress. Tell us how that was for you and what your experience was like.
Yeah, it was really crazy. I mean, I think so. Obviously, I was sexually assaulted as a 16-year-old. So that was a really, really challenging thing that happened to me, dealt with through high school. I wouldn't wish it upon anyone, for obvious reasons. I think sort of everyone's on the same page as that on that issue. But that is really what brought, so when I went to Penn and I, went to the swim team, I really felt sort of back to being vulnerable and being 16 again and being in that situation because of what happened. And it was very, very challenging for me because nobody was really talking about it because, again, like the Me Too movement was a traditionally leftist thing, right? People on the left were very like huge on talking about sexual assault. And then on this issue, they were saying, well, of course, this is great and progressive, and of course, he should change in the women's locker room. And I felt myself very confused because it felt so conflicting. And I knew, obviously, it was wrong. And I knew what happened to me was wrong, too. But that was something that was really, really, like, challenging for me to deal with. And that is ultimately, I think, what made me realize very quickly how wrong it was. And also, in a weird way, like, empowered me to speak on it more. Because I had, like, more substance and validity to like why I maybe felt the way that I felt versus any other girl. And again, every girl who changes with a man, whether they've been assaulted or not, will be uncomfortable, of course. But I think for me, I felt like I had that extra like ammo to be like, okay, well, this is uncomfortable, of course it is, but here's why. And so interestingly, when I first started speaking about this issue, I didn't disclose that at first because I said, okay, well, wait a minute, let me just talk about how unfair it is, and I'll find the appropriate sort of environment to talk about really the ridiculousness of this, because I knew that when I said that, it was going to really make some leftists go into a tailspin. And so conveniently, I realized, okay, I hadn't talked about it yet. So the best way to unleash it would have been like in Congress, which was really scary for me because
Yeah.
obviously I'd never publicly spoken about it. And again, I'm fine with people knowing because I was very open about it, but it was definitely like I had to think like with a lot of care and effort about like how I wanted that to come off. And so deciding to do that in Congress, it definitely shocked a lot of people in the room. And I think that, again, like the hearing I thought went well. I thought the questions that were asked, I answered. And Chloe Cole was there, who's great. If you're not familiar with her story, she's a detransitioner, went through horrible things as a minor, thanks to the medical industry and the other bad actors we've been discussing.
Yeah.
But it was so interesting because I am waiting. So hearing is over. We're done. I'm trying to leave. A staffer from the Democratic side comes up to me, blocks me in my chair, and just says, "Hi, like, I know I don't know you, but," and I was like, "Okay, where is this going?" And she starts to tell me that she's been assaulted as a minor, and she told me, quote, "You are using your trauma to push pain on marginalized people, and you need to reconsider your stance on this issue. I've also been assaulted, and I don't feel that way." And I said, "I'm sorry that you went through that, but you were not in my locker room. You don't know what I experience every day, and I think that my feelings are valid." And we kind of kept going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then she just screamed something at me about how she sees that I'm a Christian and that the church hates me and I'm going to burn in hell for my stance, and walks away.
Wow. Wow. What a girl power. Hey, women helping women, right? I mean, we're standing together.
And it's funny because I sort of envisioned that would happen that way, but it was so funny because it was like as quickly as it could have happened. Do you know what I mean? Like I had first time ever spoken about it. I knew that the people on the left would say she's a liar, or we don't support her, or the Me Too movement doesn't like you speaking about this. And it was just funny because it happened like as soon as it could have happened, like quite literally the first person who spoke to me once the hearing was over. And so it showed me. And then again, as this started, so after I did this, there was a lot of follow-up interviews and appearances that involved my story and that aspect of the story. And there were people on the trans activist side tweeting out that they said that my story sounds made up and that I'm a liar. And those same people had tweeted, #MeToo, believe all women. And so I would snap back at them and I would say, okay, so it's believe all women that agree with you politically and want men to undress in locker rooms with women. And it's still something I'm dealing with, where actually I just did a speech last week. And one of the questioners on the opposing side told me that I'm using my experience to further marginalize people. And I said, you might feel that way, but I feel a way that I felt changing in the locker room, and you can't invalidate that experience. And they'll continue to do that. And they'll say, you're using it as a political weapon. You made it up. This is a plant. And all of this stuff. And it's just, that to me is really something I'm starting to see more and more and more as, again, people get angrier and they want to find dirt on you and they want to be angry. And so that congressional testimony, I think, really opened that can of worms. And it's so funny because I predicted it. It was exactly how I would have imagined them reacting. And it shows their true colors. And it's honestly sad. I feel really sad that they feel that way. But it shows, again, this entire movement and all the people on that side of the aisle that want to talk about it, it was only about political advancement. It was only about advancing political policies. And again, the trans issue on the Democratic side has taken a bigger part of their thing. So they've abandoned this Me Too movement. They've abandoned empowering women to speak up. And they've adopted now saying anyone's a woman. And actually, let's highlight people who are men when we're talking about Women's History Month. And we're talking about modeling women's clothing and every women's thing that you could imagine. And so for me, like in that experience, it really I already knew, but it really confirmed what I knew to be true of the people who pretended to be in support of women.
Well, it strikes me, and I'm sure you've wrestled with this too. What is the final agenda item? What is the goal? I mean, if this keeps going, this trajectory, as you've spoken to, we won't have women in sports, period. It'll be the varsity and the JV. So it'll be the men who are going to compete with other men, and then the fake women who will compete against each other. Women will be just completely kicked out of the entire realm. It will ultimately erase women. It will. How can you not erase women when it doesn't? What is a woman? That the Matt Walsh film. What is a woman? And people can't answer. Women your age can't answer. The Supreme Court justice can't answer what I'm not a biologist. I can't answer what a woman is. I mean, I don't understand. Again, getting back to all the work that our grandmothers and mothers fought so that we could have rights to exist and be seen and be heard. And that's wonderful. I'm thankful for all that. Except now the patriarchy is going to just take, the best woman is a man. What Glamour magazine had the woman of the year was Caitlyn Jenner. So now men are better at being women than women are? Is that the end goal?
Yeah, and I think it's coming from sort of, like the movement. And again, like, I don't want to blame feminists for this, but there is like sort of something to be said about how it started off being, well, you don't need a man. You can have a high-powered job. You can make all the money. You can be the breadwinner. You can do all these things. And empowering women, and as they should be, right? I studied engineering in college, which is traditionally something for men. I went on and the job I had after college was very high-paying, and I had male classmates at the University of Pennsylvania that made less money than I did. Sure, of course. And again, I empower all women to do things like that. But at a certain point, it goes too far. And this is how every single thing that ever happens, it gets to a point where you go so far, you end up moving backwards. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we are now. And it's the whole breaking down the idea of gender roles, breaking down the idea of the family. I think that's a bigger thing where people are not encouraging family structures and family dynamics. And again, not to say that, there aren't women who work and there aren't households where the woman makes more money than the man, of course, and I encourage that. And if that's what works in your family, of course you should do that. But I think that there's just a lot of just hate on that. There's hate on religion. Mm-hmm. I think that's a bigger thing too, is that the religious institutions have gotten a lot of hate and been under fire, and because people have that void in their life, they need to pick up a new religion. And in a weird way, all of this crazy stuff has become the new religion. And the people that are idolized are the people that are voted to be most oppressed, which in this case is trans people for some reason. And I think that there's a lot to be scared about in that sense. But I think the biggest thing where we are now is we have to start standing up. We have to start, putting our money where our mouth is. So something we talk about a lot is like how this Bud Light thing. And we're going to talk about this brand Authentics, right? There's these brands that are picking up on this and saying, okay, we're going to start restructuring society to match our values. So now you have to start putting money into the brands that you want and the brands that will support you. And I think that's kind of how you start to slowly take things over again. And you start to say, okay, no, enough is enough. We want people to value being parents. We want people to value the unique role a woman has, which is to have a baby. And if you don't know what a woman is, then you're not going to be able to reproduce. That's what I always tell these crazy activists. I say, you are here because of a woman and a man. Whether or not you agree with what that is, like, I know what it is and I know why you were here and how you were made. And so that's something I think is something we all have to work on, and we have to be vocal about it. We have to support people who want to do the traditional things, who want to value having family. I know like birth rates in a lot of countries are declining, and that's something that is very problematic. And again, a lot of that comes from, well, I don't need to have kids. I don't want to have kids. And I just want to be happy and to make money and to do whatever I want and be free. And in some cases, that's just not how you continue society. You have to make these sacrifices to want to continue, to want to pass things down to a future generation. And I think like there's just been a disconnect in that lately. And again, I don't know all the answers, but that's just like what I've observed.
Right. Well, and to me, it gets back to just perpetuating lies. And women were, again, there can be advancements, to your point, well put, that eventually the progress ends up being regressive. And when we get to the point where we tell women they can have it all, we can tell them that their job will be as fulfilling as marriage and motherhood. And for some women, sure, fine. But for the vast majority of women, and this is I've worked in the dating relationship space. I wrote a book about being single. I didn't get married until later, called off an engagement, had a long, just lots of vicissitudes in my dating history. But that desire, that deep desire to find your person, to build a life with someone, 99% of women want that. and for the rhetoric to be, you don't need a man, that's not going to give you any fulfillment, or just focus on your career. Fine, do that. But it's, again, perpetuating lies that a domestic life with some traditional values is meaningless and robs women of their opportunities. Actually, it can be deeply meaningful for most women. It is the most deeply meaningful aspect of their lives. No matter how whip smart they are with their engineering degrees and their high-powered jobs, there's still that reality. And when we're not telling women this truth, then we're lying. We're just perpetuating lies, and societal institutions start to break down. And I think that's what's happening with these young women who, or any of us who are believing these lies about sex, about basic biology. And it's all tied together. And Kara Dansky did talk about that as far as being a very proclaimed feminist, which I would never call myself a feminist because I'm pro-life. I mean, there's a lot of things that would go against that agenda. But I understand someone in my generation who does call herself a feminist, and now seeing, to your point, that things have moved in a direction that is really stepping outside of what's really about empowering women.
Exactly. And it's so scary. But again, I am hopeful because to see, we talked about this at the beginning, right? Kara Dansky, all these different people coming together, coming together and wanting to take a risk and start their own brand that has values, wanting to, say things that are controversial, risking losing their jobs. I've known people who have lost their jobs for the things that they've said about this issue or or other sort of political issues. And I think that that's like really where we start to claim back. And I think a lot of it is people are quiet. I've noticed that on my swim team, obviously. I think we have to stop with that. We have to be vocal. We have to be willing to take risks for the right reasons. And I think for me, and I talk about this a lot, so obviously I was quiet for some time before I spoke out about what happened. And people ask me all the time, what was your turning point? There's a story of this girl, Peyton McNabb, high school volleyball player, knocked unconscious by a male player on the opposing team, male athlete who identified as a girl and wanted to play on the girls' team. Knocked unconscious, half her face was paralyzed from this injury. Just horrible stuff. She was now in college, not able to play sports. I saw what happened to her, and I immediately felt, I was sitting at my corporate job in my office when I found out about the story. And I said to myself, this is insane. And the fact that I'm quiet, I'm allowing this to happen by being silent because I'm not helping people become aware of what I went through. Because again, what had happened on my swim team was not really public knowledge. It was only whisperings and anonymous interviews and secondhand information. I said, if I'm not going to use my experience and try to better this, or at least the very least expose the truth, I am part of the problem. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. They say, well, it's okay, somebody else will do it and it's not my problem. No, if you are silent on something that you see is wrong, you are part of the issue. And that was sort of when I had that awakening and realization, I felt this immense feeling of guilt. I felt like a terrible person, and I really grappled with that for a long time. And I realized, you know what? Whatever I might lose, so what? I lose a few friends. So what? I lose a job. If you lose the job, that's not somewhere you wanted to work. And if you lose some friends, they weren't your friends to begin with. And once I had the realization, what do I really have to lose? It was nothing compared to girls being permanently injured. It was nothing to seeing girls be assaulted in bathrooms in high schools. And again, experiencing what I experienced, I would never want another 15, 16-year-old girl to go through what I went through. And if I'm going to stand by and let that happen with information that I have, I can't do that. And I hope more people start to sort of come into that headspace and realize, and again, I'm not asking everyone to go do interviews or go on the news. It's really just about being vocal with people around you and raising awareness. And it's so funny because when I was in college and just in my life in general, even at my corporate job I used to work at, I would talk about this very openly. I was very open about my opinion. And it was so funny because I had coworkers be like, oh, we weren't sure what you thought about it. So we didn't want to say anything. We didn't want to ask. And I said, why not? Because even if I disagree, you should still be able to say that. You should still be able to voice your concerns on the issue. And people just don't want to do that because they're afraid of how they might be perceived and what their friends might think and all these other factors that in the long scheme of life are really not that big.
What is that quote? And I don't know who said it, but for evil to continue, it doesn't even take much more than for good people to do nothing.
My dad said that at dinner last night.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not even exaggerating.
Yeah, yeah.
We were just talking about that. Yes, that's exactly what my dad. Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Literally last night at dinner.
Yeah, I got to figure out who said it because it came to mind and it certainly applies. And I think to your point, you have a nice big platform, and I love that you stepped into this realm and you're devoted to it. Based on your experience, you have the credibility to speak to it. But I think all of us in our small sphere of influence need to have these conversations. But to your point, many people are unwilling to do just that, have these conversations. Everything gets shut down and polarized, and it's very sad. And it's not very critically thinking minded. It's very in cognitive development. I'm a developmental psychologist. We talk about the stages of cognitive development, and we talk about how when we're little, like in third grade, everything's black and white. It's good, bad, all or nothing. And that's kind of where we are as a society, with that very polarized way of engaging or just refusing to engage in discourse around these subjects. So I appreciate so much you being out there. Talk about your career shift rather. You are now an ambassador for the Independent Women's Forum. So tell us a little bit about that and your role therein. And so you had that moment of going, I need to step into this full time. And then did they contact you, or did you contact them, or how did this happen?
Yeah, so obviously Riley Gaines had been someone I had been speaking to a lot. And again, I worked as a product manager at a finance technology company in New York City. Very different from what I'm doing now. And I liked it. I mean, it was great. I was doing what my degree was for. I was working with other people my age and obviously other adults too. And it was interesting because I obviously knew I had to speak about this, so I did, and I had been in contact with Independent Women's Forum. They were actually planning, so I was based in New York City, they were planning a media salon dinner in New York with some media, and they invited me, and this was again before I had spoken out. But they knew that I was going to, so we were sort of in talks for a while, and after everything came out, I was still obviously working at my job, and it was so funny because I was on the news for the first time ever on like a random Tuesday, and I went on. It was Laura Ingraham. It was at like 10:30 p.m. at night, and I woke up the next morning at 6 o'clock and went to my office, walked myself to my office like nothing had happened. Didn't say anything to any of my coworkers, but obviously people started finding out about what I had done. And again, like I really wanted to try to make it like low key. I was still figuring out what I needed to do, but I knew that the only way to do it correctly was to leave my full-time job. And it was really funny because there's this guy in our office who was my same age as me. And he, I guess the best way to explain it, he was kind of like goofy and just like, kind of like not a very serious person. And again, great guy, no discredit to him for that. It was not in a negative way. And he texted me and he saw what happened. And he said to me, Paula, I don't give people advice often, but you have to go do this and you have to go do it full time, because the first bold step was coming out publicly. And now that you've taken that bold step, everything else that you do afterwards is going to be that much easier, and you need to leave the company. And it was funny because it was somebody who, again, I was close friends with and valued his opinion, but also he was someone who never really took things seriously. And so to hear something so serious from somebody like that, I was like, okay, wait a minute, you're onto something here. And so that was actually really like what I decided to do. And so obviously go through the process of like putting in my 2 weeks, and it was very interesting because there were a lot of people who didn't actually know what I was doing, and I wonder if they even know now. And there were people who were so supportive. In my last few weeks in my old job, there were people from different departments that I didn't even work with messaging me on Slack and messaging me on Teams and just saying that they supported me. And so that was crazy. And it was definitely very scary to do. So then I eventually obviously did that. And then I started working at the Independent Women's Forum, but I wasn't sure if it was going to be fully ironed out when I did quit. So there was really like 2 weeks where I was sort of like, okay, it's in your hands, God. Like, I'm going to figure this out. And again, it's very different, but it's so rewarding. And now I get to work on legislative work. So one of the big things we're doing at the Independent Women's Forum, or under Independent Women's Voice, so that's our other organization where we do more policy work, We are passing legislation in the states. So again, current administration, we're not really going to have much luck with passing something on the federal level for obvious reasons. But we're going state by state, and it's something we call the Women's Bill of Rights. And essentially, it doesn't actually create new laws. It just codifies terms like woman, female, man, boy, girl, and says what they're supposed to mean. And so that way, there's no room for unelected bureaucrats to come in and read it to mean whatever they want, meaning a woman can mean anyone who identifies as a woman. We're saying, no, when it says woman, this is what it means. And also making sure everyone's on the same page and speaking the same common language. And so that's really cool because we get to go testify in front of states. We get to meet with legislators. I get to travel to states I never would have ever imagined I would have been to. But it's just really rewarding to also get to meet people in different parts of the country. And again, my old job, mostly everyone was based in New York City, banking and all of that stuff. So it's definitely a huge switch, but it's so valuable. And I think that there's always room to do something you're passionate about. And it's also funny to me because obviously I didn't study this in college. So it's really, I'm learning a lot on the job, but it's really shown me, like, again, you can do anything you want to. Like, you can always pivot. You can always change career paths. You can always go find opportunities in something that you want to do. And for that, like, I'm always so grateful. And I think it's just like really great to get to do something and get to see the people's lives that you're changing, and to meet these young girls who are going to be helped by these policies. Sometimes their parents will bring them out, and you see the actual 6-year-old girls who are forced to be in the same bathroom as boys in some of these school districts, which is wild to me. And again, that really, it just shows me who I'm fighting for. I get constant reminders, and I get so many messages from people in these various places across the country, or on different sports teams, or in whatever, and saying, like, thank you for what you're doing. Like, I also need help. And we also have the opportunity to get to help these people who are put in situations where they're forced to compete against men, or they're losing their prize money to men, or whatever it might be.
Right.
So that is always so valuable. And again, it's busy, and it's happening a lot more than anyone can even imagine, which is horrifying. But being in a position where we're trying to slowly make changes is super valuable.
You mentioned your faith in God. I saw one of the videos that you've done for IWF. And talk about that, because I think it's something that has, when you think about you stepping out and leaving your job, that's all a risk as well. And you've been getting so much wonderful feedback, but I'm sure you've had some haters out there. I mean, gosh, I know Riley got almost like accosted at some West Coast school. I can't remember, it was maybe a year or two ago, where she was shouted down. They wouldn't even let her finish her speech, I think. So this is not for the faint of heart. So how has your faith given you the courage, or has it, or in what way has your faith played into where you are right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was really interesting because before I came forward, I was praying a lot more than I normally do. I was feeling very drawn to leaning on God a lot more. And this is probably about a year ago. This was April 2023 was really when I started feeling like I had to. And I really just prayed for peace, which is so interesting because that had never been something I had ever really prayed on. I'd always, thanked God for everything he's given me, and also obviously asked for things, and like anyone really does. But it was interesting because I was feeling so conflicted. I think the biggest part about what had happened, again, I was thinking about Peyton McNabb's story. I was thinking about potentially all these things I might lose. And I was just feeling so conflicted. And that was something I had never really felt before. And so I really just prayed for peace in that, to not feel anxiety, to not feel conflicted. And sort of in that period of time, I really came to the realization that I had to do it. And that, of course, there would be a little bit of anxiety that would come out from it, but that it would be worthwhile because I would be speaking the truth and I would be letting my heart out. And it really came to me that I would be at peace if I did it. And I was. And I truly, it was scary. It was definitely nerve-wracking, but that is how I found peace and how I sort of came to that in my journey of just like where I was at that time in the year. I don't really have like a better way to explain that. I know it sounds super convoluted, but it's definitely been a great thing to have. I think there's also a lot of hate for Christianity. I sort of mentioned that. That's something I deal with a lot. There's a lot of people who try to discredit my opinion on this because I'm a Christian. People will often say like I'm, a crazy right-wing Christian nationalist is something I get a lot. But no, I thank God every day for the strength. There's also a lot of different factors that had to do with me even being on the team at all. I actually thought I was done swimming. I wasn't going to be on the team when this happened, and I had this really strong period where I felt pulled back. And it was interesting because before I thought about going back, I had this we had a Catholic missionary on campus that I had a relationship with and had relationships with some of my other teammates. And I talked to her a lot and explained how I was feeling and feeling like a pull to go back to the team. So it was just such a weird series of events that sort of God put me in each spot and each position at each time for the right reasons. And some people will call me crazy for saying that, or say you're just a self-obsessed or not. I get that a lot. People will be like, oh, she's just a narcissist that just thinks that she's, whatever. But it's
Wow.
just I know it is, again, there's so much hate, especially with people in my age. I remember this one time at my old job, someone was talking about religion and I was like, yeah, I'm actually really religious. And the guy looked at me with a face of disgust. It was like, how dare you be a 23-year-old that has faith? How dare you be a 23-year-old that wants to go to church? And so for me, that's always been something I've dealt with, especially at this age. Again, most people my age are not religious at all.
Right.
But I know always thanking God. I think that's been my bigger thing, is that a lot of negative things have happened to me in my lifetime, at every stage. And I have really learned to appreciate the good much more than the bad. And also knowing that the bad things happen to me so I can make good on them. And that's something I really only came to in the last few years of sort of my faith journey. Because at the beginning I was like, why would you do this if you're supposed to be good? Why would you let horrible things happen to me? Why would you make me undress in a locker room with a man? But really taking that away and just feeling, no, those happened to me. It's terrible. And it sucks, but we can make good on it, and we can continue to share God's word and wisdom and his strength through talking about this experience, through helping other people, through empowering other people to also look to him and also look to the truth. And I think that's the biggest thing, is also grappling with the truth. I think that was something I struggled with a lot too, feeling like I wanted to be loving and caring and kind, but also truth. And that's also been another aspect too, where a lot of Christians on this issue have struggled with as well. And I think that the bigger thing is to be loving by being truthful, and that balance has also been something that I came to, that definitely came from a lot of reflection and prayer and all of that. And I know that there's others that are still struggling with that, so that's also an aspect I think people are going to struggle with.
Well, it strikes me as very odd that someone would think you were narcissistic just for reflecting on your life and seeing where God ordered your steps and where God allowed things. I mean, that's hard for all of us. Why do bad things happen to good people? But God can redeem, like you said, he can make good from the bad. That's the redemption of Christ. And that's why we're Christians, is life is flawed and it's a fallen world. But no matter what we go through, God can redeem it and use it for his good and for our good and for his purposes. And for that to be painted as narcissistic, when that's just so humble to me.
They don't have a relationship with God.
Right.
So I think a lot of people feel that if you say anything like, God is telling me to do something, or I'm feeling drawn by God, they'll say that's just yourself feeling drawn to do what you want to do. And so that's, again, and then it's a very fringe group of people that really say that. But that's what I was getting at, right?
Yeah.
There's some groups of people that really don't believe. And I pray for them. But it's when they view our relationship with God, they just view that as your own relationship with yourself. And sometimes they can, sort of view that as being not calling to a higher power. It's just calling for your own self-elevation and self-pride or whatever.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that God is using this issue and all the other, the many concerns we have going on right now in our culture. I'm hopeful that he is revealing himself to people. I do see that with different concerns. Certainly pharma is a big concern of mine, as we've talked about a moment ago. And I've interviewed a psychiatric nurse who worked in a psych ward and used to be very pro-pharma and then has really turned a corner and now questions pharma the way that you and I have questioned them today and do so always. And he is not a person of faith. And he mentioned that when he was doing some protests against all the hospital workers who got fired during COVID if they didn't want to take the shot. And he said so many of them were Christian. And he was not a person of faith. But at that alone, seeing other dissidents in the movement who have a firm connection to God, it's kind of making him question his own decision not to have a connection with God. So I think there is room for God to reveal himself in very powerful ways in the midst of what feels like a very dark time.
Yeah, no doubt. And I've definitely seen that. I've definitely seen a lot of people sort of come to that. And again, that's what I want. I think I want them to have that. I want them to feel that they can pursue a relationship with God and not worry about what other people think. I think, again, right, a lot of it's just the scrutiny. I think the judgment. I definitely get a lot of, like, I was just actually reading, I try not to read comments. I really do.
Yeah.
But everyone falls, to it. But it was interesting because I was, kind of going head to head with this person on the other side. And at the end of my statement, I said something like, like people are rejecting the body that God gave them. And apparently some people were like, well, that's made up. Because I was saying to the person in the question, like, just because you believe something doesn't mean that it's true. And they had like a huge there's a lot more pushback than I really imagined on that. Because when I said it, I didn't even think anything of like that I was pushing religion on people or anything like that. I just said like, oh, the body God gave you. Like, that's what we were taught. And it was just kind of sad to see so many people have objection to that. But again, I really try my best to just again, like, I want happiness for them. I don't hate anyone. I think that's the biggest thing about this whole journey is a lot of people are like, I don't speak negatively about Leah. I don't wish him, ill in life. I don't blame him really for this. I blame the rules for allowing things like this to happen. And I think that's the biggest part is that we have to really just think about, okay, this horrible thing happened, but let's work to fix it instead of being angry, instead of placing blame. And that's something I think even people on our side struggle with too. And I think I always tell people to really try and think about, okay, why are you upset that this happened? And now how are you going to fix it? Instead of just saying, I'm upset this happened and I hate everyone involved, because that's not a productive solution. And that's something I always try to encourage people to sort of come to and to act that way. And again, I still work on it. There's days where I'm angry. I'm not perfect in that, but that is really where we all need to come from, our side, other side, and really come to that place of, okay, we have problems and we need to fix them, and we should not spend time being angry and yelling at each other.
And to your point, as Christians, we are called to love. We're called to love our enemies. We're called to love those people who are leaving those nasty comments in the comment section. We're called to love everyone. And in my view, as I understand my relationship with God and what God is about, truth is love. So getting back to the point of, we're not loving anyone by affirming lies, whether it's their own delusions, whether it's the lies that UPenn allowed to perpetuate or to permeate throughout the NCAA as well. I mean, all these lies, that's not loving. It's not loving. And we get painted as the evil haters, but truth is ultimately loving. And I appreciate that you try to stay grounded in that. It's not easy when you've been hurt and when you've been violated and not protected.
Exactly. And I think that's the biggest thing is so again, I had a little bit of time before I publicly spoke about this. And it was interesting. And like I was like praying every single hour at this point. Like I was just felt so conflicted. I was so anxious. And the biggest thing, and like something, my brother actually came to me and he said, okay, because I said, I want to do this. And he said, okay, I think you should. But the first thing you have to make sure is that you aren't angry at Leah. You aren't blaming people for what happened, and you actually want to make a difference. And as soon as I realized, and I said, you know what, that is completely true. And when I went and did that first interview, a lot of the commentary and response I got from people is that they didn't feel like I had a bone to pick. They didn't feel like I was just complaining about what happened. They didn't feel like I was angry at everyone for letting this happen. And that's how I knew I succeeded in that, because I said, okay, yeah. And I truly did not feel that way. And coming to that, again, I thought it was going to be a lot harder, but it really was to just say, take a deep breath, let go, and just let God take the reins on this, and just say, I'm going to speak, I'm going to do this interview, and I'm going to let his words come out. And And I was very happy with how I was able to do that. And I think that that helped also. I have a lot of supporters from people who are on the other side in a way that other people in this space don't necessarily have. So I feel like by doing that, that's really how you open the doors to more compromise and more agreement. And it's hard because obviously, like, it's not maybe as popular and there aren't going to be as many likes and whatever, but to really open the doors to as many people as possible, you do have to act in that way and love and not hate. And it's so hard, and it's something, again, like, I'm still working on, everyone's still working on. But that, I think, is so powerful. And that's what, again, like, with anything in your life, that's always what I encourage other people to act, and how I encourage them to treat these situations.
And you were praying for peace, and the Bible talks about the peace that passes understanding. So by the time you were ready to have that first interview, you did have that. You came from a place of peace and not hatred, not trying to attack anyone, just trying to be like, this is what happened, this is what's going on. And you were coming from a peaceful position, which I think God honored and answered that prayer for peace that you were praying, which was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Thank you for, like, having this conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a lot where I got to get into, like, really, like, the nitty gritty of sort of how I came to where I am. So I do appreciate sort of having a partner to talk to about this, and a conversation partner that's not like, a lot of the stuff we do is only, 5-minute hits. And so when I do get to have these longer conversations, it's very meaningful. It's very reflective for me. I always walk away feeling like I even learned more about myself than I even knew. So
yeah, no, so appreciate your time and what you're doing for the movement and to protect women and all the things we've been speaking to. As we wrap up, tell us a little bit about Authentics and what that brand is about. You mentioned how one of the things we can do in this movement is to support brands that align with our values and are passionate about the same concerns that we are. So talk about Authentics.
Yeah, so Authentics is a brand only for women. And so a lot of the proceeds to help Independent Women's Forum, because we were very closely connected with them. So that's wonderful. The lady who founded it, great woman. She's really about having a brand only for women, and just really trying to empower things. Something she's talked about wanting to do is she's helping give uniforms and outfits for young girls on sports teams to wear. And I think that that's super powerful. I think it's also great that you step into the space where all these other brands that are sort of supplying these things like Nike and Adidas and all of that, they're having men model women's clothing, which is crazy. And so, again, it's time that we all start to sort of put our money into organizations that support our beliefs, and that we know the money is going to someone who's not going to pay a man to model women's clothing. I think that's something so important, and that's something that is so fun to me, because all of these, and not just Authentics, there's a bunch of different brands, and sort of every single thing that you might want to buy or consume that they're starting new brands after Bud Light. I know there was like beer brands that were coming out after, every single niche that there is. So obviously I don't have all of them, but to continue to look for those and know that, it's time you start supporting other people that support you. And so, again, Authentics is one of those brands. They've been great. They send us a lot of super cute clothes. I just opened another package. I should have grabbed something from it, but I think it's just wonderful. And again, it's scary for those businesses to start anything, because, again, it's such an oversaturated market, but not oversaturated with people that have our beliefs and support us. And so I think that if you have, dollars to spare there, that you should also give them support, because it is a risk for them to maybe quit their other job or to invest their own money into it. So I do appreciate all the people who take that risks, especially at Authentics and other brands like that.
Yeah. And Authentics is with AUTHENTIXX, obviously.
Yes.
So thanks again so much, Paula. Appreciate everything that you're about, and for a nice lengthy conversation. And I'm so thankful that it felt therapeutic, I hope, a little bit for you too.
Yes, definitely. I really appreciate your time. I would need to hire you as a therapist.
Hey, we can do that. All right. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, as always, for joining us today. It means so much to Elliot and me. We really appreciate you being part of the Love and Life family. And until next time, make it a great week.